Okay, so. I recorded a test, and so by recording a test, I had to listen to myself, and that's gonna dig me all sorts of tailspins. I think it's the part where it's all low. Yeah, I wonder if this is how the rest of them work every day. Also, opening this thing up feels like being hit by a truck. Speed run. The safety system was developed by Sebastian when Sebastian and Seto were still working on Season 3 for Seto's randomly generated map system. The Kill Yourself Woods is probably a real place. We never got that far. Hornswell Dungeon was also intended as a real place, if you can't tell the Resident Evil influence yet. Each of the mountains were designed to be named off of each of the different elements from Genshin. Pyro, Animo, Hydro, probably Cryo. Geo Mountain's a little too on the nose, but I like it. As for some of the monsters that could have appeared but never did, this was designed to be the primary dex for all of the monsters. If you wanted to add something else, you had to have a damn good reason for it. Everything should be. And because of that closed system, the idea was it was going to give it a little bit more of a clean feel, which I'd say worked out. Handbirds never appeared in the second run of it. Plants and Tia never appeared in the second run of it, but would have been great if they did, because there was also a chance they wouldn't be elf-based. They'd be demi-human-based, or we'd see some variants. Joycidae appeared. Specco. Oglia China never showed up. They were for a later section for the Halfstakes area. Oglio China is named after, I think, the genus of earthworm that it's based on. They're these little worms, and then they have transparent legs, so it looks like they just kind of float places, but they're actually made out of like a quartz, a thick substance. They're probably terrifying and probably covered in slime. I haven't reviewed any of this, so I'm not doing too bad. Also, they're edible. A lot of things in this were edible, because if you could bring them back, you are basically winning party favors. That's a fun note. So, first generation cultists, the Season 1 cultists, were given the name Rash cultists. The lore states that they basically have phased so many people, and they were so giddy about it for the 4 or 5 years at this point that scent had come and influenced things, that they drove themselves insane and burned themselves out too quickly. The biggest difference here is that that's what is supposedly restricting them to randomly selecting targets. The upgrade is what Village features, which are cultists. They have to be talked down, and they can select targets at will of the DM. But typically at will of themselves, and with a pretty straightforward list of what you have to go off of. How do I put it? There's some people that'd stick up for them if all else failed. That said, even though I'm pretty sure I made this list, I actually like the other list more. Oh yeah, I'm gonna have to get into that. Ignore some of these. Oglio China. Yeah, it's just a fat worm that floats. He rams into things. He can stain your clothes. Can you tell that this is a mid-game enemy yet? He can burrow at cost of having his target randomly selected, and no one knows what the slime does. This is because there's a variant of these designed for once you get into areas where scent has probably been. I think it has a variant here. In which case it's a variant pink Oglio China. So the idea is you get warmed up to one. You have one that you get used to, and then you start seeing the variants. There's a few different variants in Intimancy Village. Sandstones never got to see the light of day, but they were definitely there, and that was probably a founding decision. The outbreak that led to Horror Eyes being created kind of stretches around the harbor in general, which now that I think about it is kind of tragic, because that implies that it's just people around there, and then they started... Oh, Deer made an appearance. Harmonizoink made an appearance. Red Harmonizoink are the more aggressive counterparts to Green Harmonizoink. I don't think they ever got a quality chance to actually show up. And there's a chance that you could get a Green Harmonizoink that would rub in the mud to camouflage itself as a red one, because they're passive and they don't really like fighting, but people are afraid of these guys. So they're, it's a way to just get out of some conflict. Their effects don't last as long, and their damage goes up. So the idea is that they could be a late game enemy so that it stops being as much of a problem, because Harmonizoinks are kind of there to tell you to just go home. That's their deal. If you can't defeat them, if you can't figure it out, please go home. You're not qualified yet. Mystiquoi were never fully explained. I don't even think they have a stat block. They are basically full-size koi fish that swim around in the air. And I'm fairly certain they were going to be the primary motif of things involving internal demons that are actively on the field. Because they're both a motif for Nixus and a motif for Sebastian, as well as something that has a good chance of being a summonable that would only be useful by Hoida, who could actually convince them to do something. Squeamish were great, and they never got to see the light of day. So Squeamish were supposed to be basically 3-foot-tall mosquitoes. They were ugly as hell, and goofy as hell, and absolutely terrifying. And the idea was, if you went out and you did you got a little hot and heavy in the woods, they will literally start drinking any bodily fluid they can shove their entire face into. And you'd think, oh man, bodily fluid, but it's INTEMANCY. No, man, I'm talking about like your kidneys, or your stomach, or whatever it punctures, really. They're terrible, but it would have been really funny, and I think it would have been so good with Blum. Oh man, Blum. Orthros were designed to be probably the outcome of whatever the hell was going on in the mansion. They're the equivalent of a Resident Evil zombie, basically. They've been eating a particular material that is produced by scent. A particular material that's produced... did I mention... I haven't mentioned the part where most of them would spawn in the mansion. Now, it's a good thing that nobody's water source flows from that mansion or anything, or, who knows, these two things might be connected. Flamingos were going to make a comeback because they are an absolutely fantastic enemy, and the concept of anyone in the party having shit ripped out of them. This thing could have literally removed the notes on Baja and just ate them in front of everybody, which would have been hilarious. And horrible. But it would have been hilarious too. And they run in packs, so they'd be an interesting enemy at the very least. They deserve a version 2 now that they've adapted a little bit. Plus, there's a chance you could get other traits, like just flat out from them. They remove concepts from things because they're a creature of thought. So theoretically, one of these guys could have eaten something, miles ago. And you could just start picking up the object of breaking it up and just getting a passive ability. And that would have been really cool. It also would have involved the potential of going into a fight with one of these with an NPC and having them get mega boosted or completely screwed. And it's not like they aren't still dangerous. That said, most internal demons, just by nature of existing, had some kind of sense about what I was pulling due to the nature of the history that was... It was new. Characters like this would be kind of grandfathered in. But there's this underlying sense that certain factions get about what's going on, about when something feels weird. That's the main concept behind the Selkies, for example, where they get a sense from the ocean, as it's called, that's more of a hive mind effect of what all of them collectively know, and a collective consensus that tells them if something's dangerous or not, or in some cases, tells them what's going on. In this case, it's kind of similar, except it'd be for the external world. So there's a non-zero chance that just by nature of these technically being one of Vanity's underlings or having some minor degree of allowed free will, they would have just ended the entirety of the problems if they were ever encountered. That said, they were late game. They were late game. You have to have a lot of spare options before people can just start ripping off options. And, let us not forget, this thing could have given Blump free will. It literally could have just gone in and chomped off the part that labels him a muse and just restored his humanity. Or Spec-Amity. Spec-Amity? The Eater theme from Digimon Cyber Sleuth. That's all. Nobody's got a lot of chance to shine, which was entirely deserved. They are like the least and most fitting creature. For context, because I don't know if it was ever gone over, nobodies are a Season 2 enemy that were introduced alongside 2 other counterparts for the stone classification. The Creep Owl, which are more around the harbor and they're kind of a boss. They are actually, I think, in the decks for a very specific quest. Just to play around with them. The Epoch Bear, which are bears that have different attacks depending on the story they're mimicking, that are designed to be lore clues. And then the Nobody. They do one thing. Okay, this thing's never gonna kill you. Though there is a concept entry at one point that states that they will kidnap you if they ever party wipe you, which would have been really interesting, but the one time we saw it, they were in service of somebody else. I also would like to say, these guys also deserve the Eater theme. I know they had a different one instead, but seriously, I can just imagine, like, hey, what's on the other side of this door? Opens the door, it's a nobody, and the Eater theme just starts playing, shuts it, and it closes off. Tesla spiders were designed to be on the map. You have caves, you have Tesla spiders. This is like one of the most iconic enemies for INTEMANCY that were ever developed, because they're really cool. That said, they never got a chance to actually see the light of day either. They've had one fight, then they got revamped for season 2, then they had another fight, but that was right before everything crashed and burned. So, by extension, you don't really know if they're balanced yet. I'm pretty sure they are. It went down really fast in season 2. Demi-human mutts never got rolled on, and I don't understand why. These things could have changed everything. We got one of them, and oh boy, man, you don't understand what the hell happened right there until I tell you. So demi-human mutts are just the generic term for, and then there's a demi-human, and there's a little bit of a leeway there. The plan is to have some generic attacks depending on what kinds of classification. So is it a bird, or is it a reptile, or does it have claws? However, until then, it's kind of DM's discretion. Most of the ones in Village are probably based on animals that got phased, but you can't tell because it's so remote and there's not really towns. They're more common. There's not just phased people running around because they wouldn't survive, which is actually the philosophy of one of the main commanders that is designed to probably be the guy to take care of the rest of Village at some point, honestly. They're pretty direct, pretty iconic. Honestly, they'd be a pretty big draw for people who are demi-human hunting. Like, oh man, I want to get myself a girlfriend. Let's go into this big mysterious forest. Halfstakes. Halfstakes are the thing I was going to talk about. At this point, we have a bit of an impasse. Because y'all never actually touch, you barely scratch the surface of what Village actually had to offer. You can know everything about what's going to happen in, say, a Pokemon game, and what kind of characters they are. You can know everything that's going to happen in a video game, and the characters and their arcs, and then sit down and play it and still be surprised by the gameplay. And Village had a very strong split of characters and gameplay. This is where we hit gameplay, because the actual game INTEMANCY Village was barely touched on. The furthest anyone ever got was the house. But, speaking of, let's pull that up real quick. Did I name it House? Holy shit, I named it House! Hell yeah! I forgot about this tagline. So the house dungeon was designed by Nixus, by the way. Dungeon! You can tell its home because you recognize everybody. So the only content that was actually planned for main battles, outside of the stuff you would encounter just by wandering around, which was moderately inevitable, were A, this dungeon, the abandoned house. It's just on the edge of town. And I mean, 30 feet. That can't be something that would cause a reoccurring problem. The house is a deep-style dungeon with a unique traversable system that was invented just off of it. But the system is actually priming you for the bigger dungeon, the mansion. The main gameplay loop, ideally, would be you go out, you go to a reoccurring dungeon that's a big enough problem that you have to tackle it multiple days in a row. So you're making a little progress every day. But in doing so, you are also focusing on just the same spot and exploring it a little bit each time. Of these dungeons, there were only 2, and then 3 to get into the big one. So you had this one, which was just to get a house. That's your reward. There were 3 others for each of the half-stakes. Also, there's 3 half-stakes. You'd go through their area, and they were a final boss in it. Not all of them have final bosses. And then you have the mansion. The southern mansion. The really big one that no one knows anything about, and everybody's kind of hesitant to go up near. That's the big guy. That was actually the content center. And the fact that no one's ever touched it means I could just wait another 2 years. I could leave this to anyone who wants to pick it up. And you guys could still play INTEMANCY Village. You could play it the way it was intended, even if it wasn't, you know, a hell revenge campaign, pseudo-lying about everything hate party. which is a terrible thing to call it, honestly. I think it was a lot more meaningful than that. But anyways, at the very least, if it's under the jurisdiction of God and not Kokichiyama, that's the big difference. Where was I? So, the house's exterior. Let's just go through all of these. Actually, do I have a version that's not... Is this without the highlighting? Please be without the highlighting. Work! Out there. Leaving the 3 speckle alone, we're gonna be fantastic. This is what it would have looked like if it was finished, unowned, you see. So you would have gotten this pop-up. And this is actually from another system that was designed for Village, which was house seeking or real estate. Because why would you clear up a dungeon in a world that really doesn't have any without a really good reason? There are a few mythical items or locations, but they're all on the scale of stuff like the Southern Mansion. It's massive. You could probably make a dungeon out of trying to storm the capital's royal castle. That's even bigger. You've got Wind Waker's prison, kind of the Kitsune City, probably in that way where, like, it's a dungeon, but then it's outside, so you don't know why you just don't leave. There's also a few very specific ones, though. There's a pair of buildings that were intended for an old elven college that were intended to be a dungeon that would have been really cool, but it was also like a mini-arc, kind of, why did you walk into this thing? Similarly to Chateau Heaven's Gate. And then there's Chateau Heaven's Gate. And then finally, there was one location that was considered called Megalith, or like the Megazoic or something. Mesozoic, I don't remember. But that was supposed to be a massive tower that was built on the one commission by the ancient dragon race, by the elves, to go, like, build them a building. So they're like, sure, and they built the coolest, most impenetrable fortress ever. And then they're like, this is stupid, can I go back to killing things? And then they left.
Alright. We were doing something, weren't we?
In a setting where you have basically no mythical dungeons where you're going after magic artifacts or whatever, like, yeah, you can go get some, but what if you just bought them? One option has always been, why don't you just, like, clear out a house? People need those. And then you could just sell it. That would make you so much money. There are so many people trying to relocate families of 8 they just got. You might as well. Farmhouse. Once you get it, you get the picture, you get the layout. And this is the key detail. This was the thing that we retranslated. And there's a lot of little rooms here. That's what makes it so interesting. But to just give you this would have felt a little bit weird, as opposed to making you visualize it, because hey, theater of the mind. It would have also had all of the same descriptions, no monsters. These panels on the side, those are for furniture. So you could put red chair. Now there's a red chair on your entry porch. That's the idea. And it's probably a very usable system for the future too. The encounters were foyer, 3 speckos. Library, 2 handbird. Half bath was a sleepy handbird. Great room, 3 plancensia and 1 specko. Basement staircase, a Tesla spider. Kitchen, 3 plancensia. Probably arranged like the dead family. Screened-in porch, 4 handbirds. Dining room, 3 nobodies. Are you getting the implication that maybe you guys got the hard encounters yet? Mudroom, 1 flamingo. Pantry, 1 demi-human mud. Grill deck, 1 demi-human mud. That one was living under the house, by the way. Like, it's in the dog run. Bedroom, 1 harmazoink. Bedroom's bathroom. And this is on the lower floor. 5 handbirds. Screw you. Enter it. Get absolutely bamboozled. Get flocked. Upstairs hallway. Upstairs hallway, 1 nobody. Master bedroom, 5 nobodies. Forgot you guys even survived that. Master bathroom, 1 mysticoi. I'm pretty sure that was the only time they... Walk-in closet, 2 harmonizoid. I'm pretty sure you beat those too. Other walk-in closet. I'm pretty sure this walk-in closet is referring to... So I'm pretty sure that this walk-in closet is... Yeah, so it's connecting to the master bathroom. No one ever opened it for some reason. It had a kitsune in it. Just a wild kitsune. They're still here. I couldn't... Like, I'm not going to eliminate all of them. Especially not with the ability kitsune going around and the inevitable opportunity for normal kitsune to see a male fox and have to deal with that epiphany. There was exactly 1 of them, which is theoretically dangerous, but because they're a lot more sentient than most demi-humans, would have posed a little bit of a moral question. and also been an opportunity to force out some information from Sky when Sky was still Sky. The attic had another Mysticoy in it, and you had to kill these theoretically to clear the whole base. But I don't know if that rule would have stayed because of the specco on the porch. The laundry room's encounter, it was a bunch of laundry, which probably would have led to some clothes or equipment. The second floor bedroom was the 3 large specco and 3 handbirds. Once defeated, I think only 1 handbird may have made it in. The bathroom featured a willing demi-human mutt. There is, and here's a distinction. So, a demi-human mutt is the generic term for any demi-human. A willing demi-human mutt is the term for someone who chose it. They're still sentient, even if they don't act like it. They are completely cognitively capable. They're basically furries. But beyond that, they can be dangerous. They like what they're doing. They don't want to stop, and they don't see a reason not to make you join in, regardless of what that implies. And because it's not just a carnal instinct, it's the worst predator of all. You're basically being hunted by man this time. But it was also just an unlabeled amount of them, probably just 1 because they kind of count as an individual. Additionally, they can be recruited. You could probably recruit a normal demi-human mutt if you really worked at it. One of them showed up actually in the original village, a donkey lady. In this case, if you really held them down and you took them hostage and you gave it a shot, you could do it. You could probably get some information out of these guys too if you really wanted to, or you had the initiative. And because of characters like Afghan and Rottweiler, there was a pretty good chance someone would have the initiative. Let alone Death, who, now that I think about it, Death probably would have just killed him. Whoa, imagine that! Walk-in closet. Plan Sensea, 1. Bathroom, 1 specco. Bedroom, 2nd floor bedroom. 2 lumps on the bed, covered up by the blankets. It's 2 titty cats, it's nothing you need to worry about. Walk-in closet, 1 willing demi-human mutt, and 1 feral demi-human mutt. Make it that what you will. Cave! 5 feral elves. Oh my goodness, I thought that was only 1. That's a bigger number than I thought. The cave is a very specific spot on here. You would have only found it if you had been paying attention to the arrows, and you would have had to go back and find them eventually. If you look here, it is literally labeled cave on the map, from the bedroom into the walk-in closet into the cave. This featured an encounter of what was going to be the most interesting, potentially, because it was originally intended to be 1, though 5 makes more sense and answers a lot of questions about the village as a whole. Now, this would have posed a problem to the entire village's social ecosystem, because up until then, they wouldn't have known about the current state of elves, and there would be nothing to explain what happened besides phases. It's very clear that they have a similar condition, but the notion that phases are exclusively beneficial would have to be shattered by how unbelievably dysfunctional they are. Theoretically speaking, this was going to be 1 encounter originally, or at least that was my idea of it. So you'd have the question of whether you need to kill them or not. They never were ran into in a proper way. Since the beginning, basically. Like, they had maybe 1 encounter. But in this case, now that we know that there's ways to disable phases, now what? Now what are you gonna do? Are you just still gonna just kill them? Especially considering the way to remove some of those is a little bit tricky, and at any time I could have theoretically restored their intelligence. That would have led to potentially a new elf, like of their dead species, just hiding out. The original idea as well is that someone was hiding them here during the period of which the house was, roughed up. The other potential, though, is that this was a house that was set aside and super expensive looking because it was for a small group of elves that were living here to study along with the rest of the southern mansion. The village isn't really servants as much as it's all the backbones for more growth. Servants would have been living in the mansion itself, but it would have given the opportunity to go somewhere, to have a base of operations. Everybody that can do something and do it well were already there. So it wouldn't have been a bad place to set up if you were, say, another race that just wanted to suck off of a Bit of a land grab. Bonus room, 5 mystic coin. It really. Walk-in closet, 2 handbirds. Basement! This one was for Sky. And this one's the end, by the way, of the entire thing. The boss you fight to get down here really is the Tesla spider. This is actually kind of your reward, and it also single-handedly blew up the entire timeline, which is 1 Xanthron and a demi-human attack dog. The demi-human attack dog comes from Death's... what the hell was it? So, during the period when we were allowed to add our own add-ons with a proper term, Death did probably the best one. He got the furthest. It even had a little bit of a playtest. He's the guy that contributed Wind Waker's Prison, which is actually mapped out in its entirety. The name of this add-on was called Death's Attempt to Make This Clusterfuck Bearable. Or should I say, Death's Attempt to Make This Clusterfuck Bearable. I'd aim that. The systems weren't fully set up yet, but it introduced a lot of really good concepts that ended up being greatly expanded on when Sebastian did Season 2. And during both that period and in general, it introduced the demi-human attack dog, which were supposedly the human army's means of dealing with something like Kitsune, or feral demi-humans in general, though their history is a lot more intricate, and actually, the clues to it were scattered all over the place in INTEMANCY Village. They were designed to be encountered relatively normally. So, with that said, the nature of those particular dogs is actually so unbelievably ridiculous that it's one of the biggest spoilers from Season 2. Make of that what you will. It answers the biggest question there, quite honestly. So I'm not going to go into it. I'm just going to tell you that somebody was breeding demi-human attack dogs before demi-humans in their modern incarnation were cool.
They were never cool. Baby.
That said, one of them is still protecting its owner, who is now a Sandsthron. Now, considering Sandsthrons stuff, I mean, they don't really leave anywhere, but nobody really moves them places. They're kind of like ghosts. They protect an area where they think something's been dangerous. This implies that this thing's head blew up in the basement, obviously. And so, it's a pretty tragic situation. The demi-human attack dog was meant to be another option for Sky to take as a muse, because it would have been really good. The summary of what these things look like is they're how do I put this? So a demi-human attack dog in size, in appearance, is kind of more Doberman in its head. It's got the pointed ears, absolutely massive jaw, and about the same size as like a cow or a small horse. You could ride them. They are designed to tackle centaurs, and they can hunt in packs. They are also all, by nature of being bred, also trained proper commands. And as long as you're using the right commands and they recognize you, which if you're a muse keeper, I think just happens automatically, you basically can have them whipping up a frenzy and coming right back. They're also, I'm pretty sure, capable of tracking to some degree. These things were monsters. They were designed to be patrolling the outskirts of the prison because the wall and the part where if you get in, you die anyways wasn't enough. Thanks, Dad. Besides that, in the basement, you would have found a very key item. These would be, some murals. I don't actually remember what was intended. Yeah, it just says a bunch of glowing murals. But it also would have featured a book that was also from Season 3, but by a different person, that being Nexus. The idea for this book was that it was going to have a list of places where you could have certain people sign to become part of an actual NPC roster, and that you would go out at that point, like a Pokedex, and collect up these signatures. So you'd be going around meeting notable characters and trying to get them to agree, to list off, okay, we've seen this guy, and oh, that's why this one's a problem, and so on and so forth. This would have included either already having lore entries on each of these people, or giving you a lore entry once you got the signature, which would have been huge. It also would have included classifications that would be otherwise invisible, like whether someone's actually an internal demon, in the case of someone like Vi. That's about it, besides that very key piece of equipment. And additionally, one theory was that it was going to have free writing pages, where you could write down stuff, and Nixus, specifically, would write back. So you would have had the opportunity to ask something about divine intervention at any time. And speaking of divine intervention, now that we've gone over the basement, I'm going to set the half-stakes aside. Let's talk about the gacha system. I guess they win in the end. Gacha! First of all, these were all picked for both Village's environment, for the classes that they could bring to the three-man party that already stood, and for helping the party have a different perspective in a way that they otherwise wouldn't. They were going to have to be a one-man piece of glue, but also be cohesive enough to work with anyone else there. There were also multiple versions of this banner, so for example, if you clear off one entry and you get that guy, you don't get him again. If they die, they're dead. But there was a list of, like, a backup of people that would take that spot. So Petunia, Henry, Afghan, they're all on there. As of now, recently, I think there's actually a way to do Marshmallow even, though that would be unfortunate. Nagato was also on the list. Time was actually also on the list, damn. Mage was there, Richard Duke and Michael were written down here, and Miyu, obviously. The other detail, if you managed to summon one of these guys. So, besides that, to acquire one, you needed 2 items. A Quem ticket and a Queritus ticket. You had to have these 2, and as of now, one of the reasons the Village has never been continued is because players have to be the one to use them. Additionally, this system was being run by the guy himself, Despian Queritus. The story goes of Despian Queritus himself of being one of Seto's favorite dual spirits, as in weird hallucination guys that kind of carry over from the main series. I think it's something about him being A, very internal demon-like, B, one of the first fusion monsters he used since he got back, and C, having a little bit of the clown aesthetic, which he actually does seem to have a weird soft spot for. The best way to summarize it is that he used to play a dragon deck that had a random amount of clowns, and now he runs a dragon deck that has a random amount of clowns. Queritus, in particular, got a little more characterization, partly just because his design was so fun, and additionally got the ability to speak via the "Hello, I am Sam" voice. That gave him just enough cognitive ability to be the best option for delivering, in this case, something in the effort of supporting his duelist, master, owner, I don't know. This is one of 2 dual spirits that had the chance to make an appearance, partly due to riding the edge of the technically akin rule, aka if it speaks and thinks and acts like a human, it's probably a human, right? Well, if it speaks and thinks it acts, but it's not really a human and it doesn't really behave like one, I guess everybody let it slide. Which makes sense. I let a lot of things slide. Anyways, the other one was actually going to be Blue Eyes White Dragon, who's made compulsions, strung together math equations, and seems to have actually the full capacity to understand the human language. The problem is that these guys don't appear as a hallucination. They would be appearing as their lore states. And the lore of the Blue Eyes White Dragon is not the same as the card spirit that is supposedly bound to a card. It would be unbound, and there was a chance that you would have had a side quest in which if Blue Eyes appeared, so would the Pharaoh, trying to get together a small party to deal with the part where this massive, destructive, legendary creature is basically wreaking havoc wherever it wants. However, that was going to be set aside for whether or not Seto himself ever came back. If he would have shown up in my D&D, he probably would have just blown everything up. Which, to be fair, that would have been kind of funny, and it's a lot funnier when you think that that's the only thought going through that creature's head. Anyways, Queritus was going to most likely handle the entirety of the gacha system. You would have given him the 2 tickets, he would have put them together, and then you're all done. From there, as soon as you hand them in, nothing happens. It's not instantaneous. You don't just walk off with your brand new player, or brand new NPC, or pseudo PC, or whatever. Surrogate party member. But that's a different thing. No, as soon as you do, it will trigger the major event that leads to them making an appearance. And so because of this, this isn't just a list of notable characters, it's also a list of characters that have typically terrible side effects half the time. Things, for the most part, you're good, but a few of them cause some major events. And so because of that, I want to give a heads up about it. For example, say one of them's a bounty hunter, you might end up finding out about this bounty hunter being here, which would have been a great character, by the way. Actually, I know who would work, too. Because the mark that he's chasing is a phased as shit demi-human now that wanders in, and he doesn't have a mark anymore, so he's just like, well, shit, can I hang with you guys for a minute? You could get to know him. You could probably let him wander away. But for now, for a second, he's all yours. Some of these backups also included Noko, who is the chick on the outskirts of town that you ran into. She's funny. It also included Koida, which would have been really funny. And also, Koida is probably the one character. She adds one character. That's just hers. It's the best character, I swear. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but I don't think so. And the idea of Koida having an entire, like, gotcha roster, you've been selected, you get to be part of the party now. She would not only know what that means, but you would have Koida in the village, she leaves town for a minute, bam, Koi's there. Okay, fine, you know what? I'm not gonna work with none of y'all unless I can, be myself for 5 seconds and tell you how much of an idiot you are! It would have been fantastic. I love that bastard so much. Right, to the Hope House. Pretty abandoned. Not that that's not reasonable. Forgot that Nagato completely went off. Real quick, funny quotes that are 100% accurate had to stop being used because if I kept listing the ones I thought were really funny, I would have to just stop listing anything. Because most of these were with the additional context of Baja being the material I was using in this setting or whatever. I can step you whatever I want. At one point during the gacha, which was only teased and never actually fully shown off, everybody started voting for which one they thought would be the funniest, listed as rooting for such and such. These were done mostly blind. However, in the case of most of the people here, they would have known exactly what it is. Oh, Shuichi was. Man, I swung so many votes. Now that I look back on it, I don't think Angel herself actually... Now that I look back at it, I don't think Angel actually ever rooted for anybody. Dang. To reveal what everyone actually voted for and who voted for it. Just by name. And then I'll go over who that actually is. Shuichi liked number 1, which was Sydney, the detective, or one of the detectives, from season 2. Number 2, supported by Sent and Michael, were Abigail, from season 1. Number 3, which was voted for by nobody, was Rottweiler. Number 4, supported by both Seto and Fabiakia, was Sent. Number 5 was Murray, like Nixus Murray, supported by Nagato, Vibe, and Murray himself. Number 6, my favorite, was supported by Sky, Kokichi, Zant, Gallagher, Midna, and Tartaglia, and was Kepto from Orange Books canon. Number 7 is Bueller. I'll get into those guys later, theoretically. Maybe, I don't know. Nobody voted for him, though, so who cares? Number 8 was supported by Nixus, was Death as a party member. Number 9, supported by Vanity, and Miu, was Chance. Number 10, supported by nobody, Prince White. Number 11, the other most popular one here. I'm pretty sure one other person supported him, and I don't know who it was. Greed, Death, Jazz, Sebastian, and Blade's Choice were all here. And it was Getsus. And number 12, supported only by Siri, Tarnish from season 2. Now, Getsus is also actually from season 2. Prince White was designed just for this, along with Chance and the Bueller in this case. And of course, Death is from season 1. So, going over all of these guys, their kits would have been... Where is it? Yeah, these guys were hammered out pretty thoroughly to be a cast of potential options. Sydney was going to use the Sealer class in its lower levels, as well as using a sword for a primary means of combat. Sydney herself was only barely touched upon, but would have been a nice, straightforward, different perspective for the village and its party. She comes from the harbor, and her backstory is short but sweet. Of her and her husband, when they were phased and ambushed by cultists on the way to the harbor as a safe spot, they ended up trying to trick him, or at the very least, she did. Her husband got phased, female. She started saying that actually she likes women, so they don't need to do much, maybe just enhance a few things, and talked the cultist out of doing anything serious. She's phase 1 and still kind of looks it, but she has her entire mind intact. It's also the kind of character she is in general. She was specifically the detective that was focusing on the headbreaker case of the 4 and the most invested in the concept that it may have been from some kind of supernatural source. I am the supernatural source she was investigating. Came a little too close. Besides that, she would have known the outside world and its current conditions in a reliable way, and that itself would have caused some problems. Additionally, by being someone who's already dodged phases, she would have been a ticking time bomb in that regard, but also as someone who's already dodged phases, she has a decent chance of talking down cultists. Abigail would have fit into the category of what barely built up for the Warden player class, which is a class that, other than Warden's the Enemy, exclusively belongs as the signature ability of Wind Waker. The concept goes that it's a defensive tank type class that focuses on taking hits for people before they come, but not quite to the same proficiency as something like a angel brawler or a berserker is what that whole classification is called, depending on how well you can take the hits. Instead, they like to restrain their enemies, and certain items can qualify as a restraint. In Wind Waker's case, it's handcuffs and poison. In the case of Selkies, it's their Selkie skins. And in the case of Abigail, it's her secondary ability as a purchased. Anything she does to someone else will then induce a sudden burst of all of the memories that she has of that thing being done to her. This is best illustrated by her primary weapon. For most of the time when she's walking around, there's an iron rod that she has jammed in her leg, so that if she pulls that iron rod and jams it into someone else's leg full force, it will cause them to spontaneously take on all of her memories from the entire time that has been in her leg. By extension, because of the way the surrounding world actually works, and that they're actually fiction, this can easily create circumstances where certain people just have more of her memories by actual years hammered out than they have of their own. And at that point, completely empathizing with her, they typically end up following her with total loyalty. There's just no one there that can fully compete. Though, when there is someone that can fully compete, they usually can handle it minus the, other traumatic aspect of it. At this point, she last appeared hanging around with the wrong crowd or the right crowd in her case. She's the one responsible for taking out the first commander in the first season of Intimancy. The party kind of didn't. They weren't going to, and then she decided to jump in because she kind of, liked the cut of their jib, and held him hostage for a little more information. Additionally, she is most clearly marked by 2 parameters. Physically speaking, she looks almost exactly like the physical body of us. Number 2, whenever she speaks, she says the opposite of whatever word she actually intends, and this would have been carried for the entirety of it. She would have appeared as and she actually has art. By the way, all the gacha characters were going to have art, and some of it's already done. So she was going to appear just busted down after dealing with Richard and just leaving him. So Commander Dickhead drifted down to where she was originally going by herself.
That's when he got the phone call, so there's no more audio, just me.